care is the most shocking and inhumane. Clearly, the pandemic in which we have been thrust has further exposed the truth of those words. As the numbers continue to reflect the higher mortality rates and the lack of treatment, ready treatment for Black and brown-skinned people. Many of you know that these patterns have devastated the communities of color across the county, whether through multi-generational homes or single or just family homes. The numbers speak for themselves, from the lack of early testing in our communities of color to the incidence of decreased priority in diagnosis and care. Surely we can all remember that the haunting video from Dr. Susan Moore, who was a medical professional and still did not receive the quality of care to which she should have been readily entitled. COVID-19 has indeed ripped off the Band-Aid and exposed the challenges associated with the inequitable delivery of healthcare. I won't begin to even talk about the display and the demonstrations of the last week. Otherwise, we'd have a whole different kind of conversation. I am, however, happy to turn the program over to Leslie Morant, who is well known in so many environments and circles. She's known as an attorney. She's worked with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. She's worked for the U.S. District Court, amongst all of those areas of her profession. While she is known for the prowess in the courtroom, however, many of us know her for her prowess and her passion for health and fitness. In fact, it was a challenge with her own health that was her own wake-up call into the field of health and fitness. And I can assure you, she has given many of us a wake-up call on the regular basis. So we're going to turn our program over to Leslie, who is going to serve as the moderator. Before I do that, I do want to welcome all of our panelists, our program participants, our audience, and to say that we are looking forward to a very instructive, a very insightful, and a very informed conversation that will allow our audience members to hopefully receive information that allows them to be informed also. Thank you so much. And Leslie, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon in this very important conversation. The COVID-19 pandemic is the most pressing and most dramatic public health concern of our lifetimes. It has disproportionately impacted Black and brown people and people of lower economic statuses. With that, so we know that recently vaccines have been approved for use, more vaccines are in development, and given the history, the well-founded mistrust that the African-American community has with the medical profession and community, there are numerous concerns about the vaccine. Our purpose here today, however, is to inform, not persuade. We are not attempting to take away anyone's agency and independent thought about the vaccine. We are, however, hoping to provide valid information from trusted members of our community, scientific professionals, medical professionals, people who have worked in clinical trials, so that much of the misinformation that has been spread in the media, on social media platforms, can be quelled, and that you can make independent and informed decisions about what's best for you individually, your family, and our community and country as a collective as we press forward for a COVID-free world. With that said, we have a lot of questions, we have a lot of experts, we have a lot of panelists. We're going to speed this thing up. We're going to move quickly because we want to give our panelists the opportunity to share their information and expertise with us. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce first our chapter president, Dr. Penny Sparks Nixon, and her remarks will be followed immediately by those of Reverend Robert Collier, who is the president of the Black Clergy of Philadelphia and Vicinity. And now, Dr. Nixon, we thank you and invite you to give your opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Soar Morant, and thank you, Soar Coleman. Good afternoon and welcome. I am so pleased to be before you this afternoon and would like to begin by thanking the Social Action Committee and the Physical and Mental Health Committee of the Philadelphia Alumnae Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated for their vision and commitment to our communities. I would also like to thank the Black clergy for their partnership as we engage in this critical conversation about the COVID-19 vaccine. It is fitting that we engage in these conversations that are really about justice for our communities as we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. today. Today's panel discussion is a noble way to honor Dr. King's legacy by providing factual information and a call to action. We can all agree that Black and Brown communities have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And as I close, Dr. King so eloquently reminded us that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So panelists, we thank you for raising your voices and not remaining silent on this issue. Thank you and God bless.
Dr. Collier, Reverend Collier.
Good afternoon. I am Reverend Robert Collier. I'm the pastor of the Galilee Baptist Church, and I am president of the Black Clergy of Philadelphia and Vicinity. We are delighted to join with Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, Philadelphia Alumnae Chapter in this endeavor entitled COVID-19 Vaccine. What does it mean for the Black communities? We are so delighted that we've come together collaboratively to inform our people so that they will know what their options are, what information is available, because we believe information is power, and we need that power to cope with this pandemic. Folk need to know what's available to them. They need to know about this vaccine, and they need to know that it is still imperative that they practice social distancing. Some people have become lax because I guess they've gotten tired, but we cannot let up. We got to continue to social distance. We got to continue to do the practices until we get this pandemic under control. So I'm looking forward to this red sofa conversation, virtual conversation. And I thank you again, Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated, for allowing us, the clergy, the Black clergy of Philadelphia and Vicinity, to be a part of this great endeavor. Bless you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. We are now going to put up a poll, 2 questions. Before we begin the panel, we just want to take a survey of what people think they know about the vaccines and if people have made a decision to take the vaccine when it's available. We are not retaining anybody's information. Your data is not being shared. It's an anonymous poll. It's just to get a temperature about what you think you know about the vaccine, how comfortable you are with the vaccine. And then after the panel discussion, after our experts and panelists have shared their knowledge and information, we're going to take a post-panel poll to see if any of those changes have responded. So, Sora Marvelisa, if you would put up the first, there are going to be 2 poll questions. Could you put up, display the first poll question? And we ask the participants to simply answer those 2 questions, which are the first one: do you believe you know enough about the COVID-19 vaccines to make an informed decision to take or decline one of them? Simply answer yes or no. And then 2, do you plan to take the vaccine? Yes or no. Again, we're not retaining information. We're not sharing information. None of this data is tied to you individually. So there's no recording and retention of this information. So we ask you to go ahead and answer those poll questions. And then Sora Marvelisa, would you let me know when we get to around 90% or so or the poll answers begin to slow down? Thank you.
Certainly.
Okay, they look like they're slowing down. We're at about 87%.
Okay. We'll give it about 30 more seconds, and then we can put those poll results up.
We're at 90%. I'm going to,
Awesome. Okay, you can show those poll results. Thank you. All right. Okay, great. So about 50 participants, you can see the poll results. We have 48% of the people who responded said they think they know enough about the vaccines to make an informed decision. That's encouraging. 53% say they do not. 75% say they plan to take the vaccine, and 25% say they do not. Thank you so much for that. I am now going to introduce our panelists, just ask them to wave as I read their bios and or their titles. One moment, please. Great. And we will start with Dr. Allison Agwu. Dr. Agwu, would you just raise your hand? Thank you. Dr. Allison Agwu has an alphabet soup of letters after her name. I'm not going to try to attempt to read them all. However, she is an associate professor of pediatric and adult infectious diseases at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Her clinical interests include HIV, AIDS, and infectious diseases. Dr. Agwu earned her medical degree from the University of Maryland School of Medicine. She completed a residency in pediatrics and internal medicine at Case Western University Hospital of Cleveland, Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital, and a combined fellowship in pediatric and adult infectious diseases at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Her research interests include optimizing outcomes for youth at risk for and living with HIV, management and treatment strategies, and minimizing disparities in the use of antiretroviral therapy, or ART, and outcomes. Her other special interests include I struggled with this word earlier. I'm going to do it slowly. Epidemiologic approaches to HIV, drug resistance, and clinical trials. Thank you for participating. Dr. Caleb Wilson. Dr. Wilson, would you raise your hand? Thank you. Dr. Caleb Wilson is the digital manager and co-founder of the National Science and Technology News Service, NSTNS, a collective of Black scientists and journalists dedicated to listening to and providing clear scientific communication to their communities. Dr. Wilson's scientific expertise is in innate immunity and cellular immunotherapy. His current scientific role is as an industry scientist and global biotechnology company. Dr. Wilson holds degrees from Alcorn State University, a BS in biology, the Pennsylvania State University, a PhD in pathobiology, and additional postdoctoral training at the University of Pennsylvania's Perelman School of Medicine. Beyond the scientific workbench, Dr. Wilson engages in STEM outreach, science communication, and science policy advocacy. Pardon me. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Sora Jacqueline Shaw, would you raise your hand, please? Thank you. Sora Shaw is a licensed clinical trials expert with 20 plus years of experience in the clinical research industry. She has had oversight of US and global clinical trials, phase 1 through 4 clinical trials, and registry clinical trials. She has biopharmaceutical and CRO experience and years of experience as an FDA investigator, and consumer safety officer. We also have joining us this afternoon, Dr. Thomas Farley. Dr. Farley, would you wave your hand, please? Thank you. Dr. Farley is the commissioner of the Philadelphia Department of Health. And from his department, we have Amber Timrell. Amber, could you raise your hand, please? Thank you. Who is the immunization program manager of the health department at the city of Philadelphia. Later this afternoon, I'm not sure if he's with us yet, is State Senator Vincent Hughes will be joining us. He is the state senator for District 7 and the Democratic Appropriations Committee chairperson. So we thank all of our participants for joining us. I'm going to ask an opening question and have the panelists answer that question individually, and then I will give I will pose the question to each panelist in turn. But our initial opening question is this. for the panelists, nearly a third of African Americans are hesitant to get the vaccine, and that's demonstrated at least in part by our poll results, which showed that 25% of the people here stated that they would not for whatever reason. According to the Kaiser Foundation study, the majority say that they are concerned about possible side effects. Half are worried that they will get COVID-19 from taking the vaccine, and 48% say that they have a general distrust in vaccines. How do you respond to those concerns, given what has been often stated as Black Americans' mistrust of the medical community? But I'd like to reframe that and place the onus on the medical community and say that instead of focusing on Black Americans' mistrust of the medical community, I would like to put that back in the hands of the medical community and say that there's a need to develop trustworthiness with the African American community. So again, I'll ask that question. Nearly a third of African Americans are hesitant to get the vaccine. The majority say they're concerned about possible side effects. Half are worried that they will get COVID-19 from taking the vaccine. And 48% say that they have a general distrust in vaccines. So how do you each respond to those concerns? Dr. Agwu, we'll start with you.
First, it's a pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of the conversation. So I respond to this how I've been responding already to my patients, the majority of who are Black and brown, but mostly Black. And it's by listening. You're absolutely correct that we do need to start by listening to hear where people are coming from, not making assumptions that Black people are all monolithic and the reasons why they're not trusting us, and literally listen to where they're coming from with their concerns, providing transparent and honest data about the vaccine, what we know, and importantly, what we don't know, and try to separate out the politics and all the things and really bring it back to the science, but also recognize and acknowledging where we've been as a medical community for a long time. And not just by saying Black people need to say it as Black physicians, but let's really earn the trust all the way around by debunking, listening, and then engaging so we can move forward.
Thank you for that. Dr. Wilson?
Thank you for having me, and it's a great opportunity to share in this conversation. I would basically build on a lot of the comments that was just mentioned. And the other thing that I would say is that along with listening for the request for the medical community to listen and provide information to help understand, I would also ask for the communities, for the Black community and the concerns, for us to see if we can find someone as some trusted external, maybe non-medical personnel or a doctor that you may, happen to know through 4 or 5 degrees of separation to help you process some of this information. And the key thing here is that the mistrust and the frustrations are based on centuries of historical issues that have happened. And so it's important for the medical community, if they're going to build that trust, is to understand that history and listen and provide that straightforward information. To touch on some of the specifics of the vaccine, we can probably get into this a little later, but so far the 2 emergency approved vaccines have been shown to be relatively safe and haven't had a lot of side effects, but that still does not assuage people's concerns. So we want to make sure that we get that information out and listen and have those conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hughes, thank you. Pardon me, I didn't realize you were on at the beginning. I'd definitely like to hear your thoughts on that.
So thanks. And as always, I'm gonna get my street cred straight. I am married to a Delta, so let's be real clear about that.
We know.
Right? So, all right. And I just texted her asking her to get on. I don't know what's going on. I'm on, she's not. I don't know what's up with that. All right. So let me just say this. Back when we were really pushing testing, and we still are, right? But in March and April, in the very beginning, and our office has worked both in terms of developing policy, but also in terms of talking to regular folk about what COVID is all about. And many of you have been involved in those conversations. We came up with the phrase that it seems has gone viral. Trusted messengers delivering trusted messages. Very important. Trusted messengers delivering trusted messages. And remember, the context of that was we had a guy in the White House who's still there, who was sending around all kinds of crazy information. No one, one day it was one morning it was one thing, 1 hour was something else, the next day it was something else. Dr. Fauci, he's saying something, everybody's, and so people did not know who they could trust. And then we started lifting up our medical people, our Black and brown medical people, our trusted messengers, delivering the trusted messages. And that made a big difference. And then made most famous by Black Doctors Testing Consortium, but there are others as well. They got very involved in dealing with the issue of testing. And we saw how that had an impact in terms of making sure that Black and brown folks got tested, all right? I submit that the vaccine piece is no different than the testing conversation. We have got to be in it. You got some incredible talented people in this conversation, have got to be deep in it, have got to be empowered to deliver the trusted message, because these are trusted messengers. They're our physicians. They're members of our sorority. When we're able to go out to a restaurant, we're at the same restaurant, we're at the same church or mosque or whatever it may be. That's fundamental to the success here, and making sure folks understand all the history that's going into this. And a Black woman, senior, like the boss in terms of developing this vaccine. That trusted message delivered by trusted messengers has got to be fundamental in terms of getting the real compliance necessary to win on this. I've been in the HIV fight since the beginning. And there were so many times where we had the chance to win that we didn't. Mm-hmm. And it took 30 some odd years to get to a position now when we're kind of, in some respects, more successful than we're not. Mm-hmm. But part of it goes to not having, in the very beginning, folks who were fully engaged, being able to deliver the right message, coming to the right communities from those same communities.
Okay. Thank you for those remarks. Dr. Farley.
Well, first, thanks very much for having me on this. And I apologize, my video cut out a couple of times. I didn't hear what the question was, but I heard some of the answers.
That's okay, great. So the question, Dr. Farley, and then I'm going to add some more to that, specifically for you as the health commissioner. The question is, nearly a third of African Americans are hesitant to get the vaccine, according to a Kaiser Family Foundation study. The majority say they are concerned about possible side effects. Half are worried that they will get COVID-19 from taking the vaccine, and 48% say that they have a general distrust in vaccines. So how do you respond to those concerns? And then that's the question that was posed to everyone else. But because you are the commissioner of the Department of Health for the city of Philadelphia, what is the structural plan response to deal with trust? What is the intended, since we know that African Americans have been hit disproportionately with COVID in terms of both mortality and transmission, does the Department of Health have a intentional response to deal with that disproportionality?
Yeah, so thanks for the question, and thanks for having this session. I really have appreciated what Delta Sigma Theta has done in the past in public health, and I think you can have a very important role here. Likewise, the Black clergy. We've had previous conversations throughout COVID-19, and I think both organizations are just really crucial here. I mean, as far as vaccine hesitancy, let me say I completely understand why African Americans would be hesitant about this vaccine. They have reason to be distrustful about structures in society as a whole, given the history of the last few hundred years, and vaccine, it's a new vaccine. So anybody could be a little bit uneasy about it being a new vaccine. And sure enough, we have found that even among healthcare workers, that African Americans have lower uptake rates, substantially lower uptake rates of the vaccine than white healthcare workers. So this is clearly a real problem. I do think that the solutions are what I heard the former speakers talking about. Honest conversations is really important, and conversations meaning listening at least as much as talking, finding what people's concerns are and having that be a conversation. And that's going to take some time. And then the trusted messengers. You know, I can talk about this. My life experience is very different from African Americans in this country. Have someone who had the similar life experience talk about this, I think is going to be crucial. So that's getting back to why this particular session is so important. These organizations that are on this call, the people on this call are really crucial potential trusted messengers, right? We certainly need to have the health experts, but we also need to have folks that are just people recognized, like their clergy members. As far as what the health department is doing, you know, we expected that we would have problems with hesitancy as we got out into the general population for availability, but we actually ran into it sooner when dealing with healthcare workers, I mentioned earlier. So we do have plans for engagement with community leaders, such as yourselves. In addition to that, using the mass media to get out messages around the vaccine, information about the vaccine, you know, those have to be paired. The mass media messages have the advantage that they can reach everybody, but they have the disadvantage that it's a one-way conversation. It provides information out there, but it doesn't have the listening aspect of it. The community outreach is talking to leaders talking to people that they have ongoing conversations with one-to-one is where the listening aspect happens. So yes, we plan on doing all that. Yes, we need to do all that. And we, frankly, in the health department are going to need the help of everyone on this call. It is not going to happen strictly by what we can do in the health department. And this is it's going to take some time, I think, to get high levels of vaccination in the entire city, but particularly among African Americans. And we honestly cannot do it without you on this call. So again, I really appreciate this group, and we need to figure out more how to work together to make this work.
Good. I'm going to follow when we come back around to you again. I'm going to follow that up, but I want to get to the other panelists. But I want to follow that up with some specific ideas about what the plan, what the structure is, how you plan to identify those community assets, those community organizations. I don't think it's something that can be done on the fly. I do believe that it's more than a matter of simply putting trusted Black Americans in front of other trusted Black Americans. We all know that, you know, racism isn't incidental. It's not to address systemic problems, you have to have systemic solutions. So I'm very interested in knowing what the city's systemic plan is, structural plan is to identify community assets by meaning individuals, people, organizations, and is there an intentional, thoughtful, well out plan to reach community members to provide the education that they may need to get people to the point of making the best decisions for them. But I'm going to proceed to Soror Jacqueline Shaw to answer my initial question, and just let me know if you need to repeat it.
No, I thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank my sorors for inviting me to take part in this very important discussion. I think in response to your question, one of course, is educating ourselves. We rely on social media, we rely on information that may not be correct. And I think that has dispelled some improper information that's leading to a lot of questions. I do like the trusted messenger message that was presented by Senator Hughes. I think that is a definite way to educate ourselves. Also, reading information. I mean, we use the internet to research specific information that is accurate, not fake news, but accurate information, and using reliable sources to obtain that information. I think that is a way that we should start with, knowing what we're getting into when we, say things like, I'm not going to take the vaccine. Is it safe? Is it effective? Those are all things that clinical trials are used for. So from what I've been able to read and review, I would say the vaccine appears to be safe and effective based off of the data that has been presented. But again, most important is that people are not relying on other sources alone, but also using their own way of obtaining information, and educating themselves about the vaccine.
Great, thank you. We're definitely going to come back to you as our clinical trials expert. The next question for you, not now, but your next question is going to be, people are very concerned, particularly when we label something Operation Warp Speed. So when you have a community that has, has well-founded reasons for having mistrust in the medical profession, and then you say, okay, take this vaccine and it's going to be promoted under Operation Warp Speed. I'm like, wow. We couldn't have come up with a worse motto for this thing, right? So for you, the next question will be, could you give, in layman's terms, just regular, everyday, typical people, what phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 looks like, what a typical clinical trial looks like, what it takes to get something through and approved in the process, and then also let us know, just on my own research, that this vaccine or the technology for this vaccine didn't happen as of January 1, that it's actually been going on for a long time. I think those are things that members of our community, but you know a lot more about that than I do, but that'll be your next up at bat, all right? And Amber, last but not least, this is our immunization program manager for the city of Philadelphia. You're up.
Great, thank you so much. And I agree with Dr. Farley. Thank you so much for inviting us and having us here today. I think that everyone has really covered it very well. I think it's incredibly, one of the things that we have found in doing immunization outreach, whether it's for COVID-19 vaccine or last year in Philadelphia, where we were dealing with the hepatitis A incident, we have found that really listening to people and meeting them where they are. So making sure that we are going to the communities where people live, play, work, it's incredibly important. And so just understanding what people's questions are. And as you said, not necessarily trying to convince people, but giving people information and allowing people to make their own decisions. That to me is what is critical as we address communities with questions about COVID-19 vaccine.
Great, thank you so much. We're going to go right into the questions. Dr. Agwu, for you, I'm going to combine two of the questions. What is the purpose of a vaccine, and how does the COVID-19 vaccine differ from what the typical person understands of vaccines? Like what is a vaccine? What's the purpose of a vaccine, and how is the COVID-19 vaccine different?
So to understand vaccines, I think it's first important to understand what your immune system is. We are all incredible beings, right? And we were designed to have our immune system, which essentially is our body's way of protecting ourselves. And what the body does is when you see a foreign thing, bacteria, virus, et cetera, your body develops antibodies to those to figure out how to basically address that bacteria or virus should you see it in the future. So in the past, we were exposed to things, and if it didn't kill us, for many things, we developed some antibody or some immune response so that when we saw it again in the future, we'd be able to protect ourselves from getting it. What vaccines do is they basically expose you to something so your body develops an immune response to it so that when you actually see that thing, you're going to be protected for it or from it, or you're going to less likely to get sick from it. So that's the idea of what your immune system is, and that's what vaccines do. In terms of the vaccines that are available to us, many of us have had the flu vaccine and many vaccines, tetanus, et cetera. There's four main types of vaccines. They're your live vaccines or live attenuated vaccines, like the old flu shot or the measles and rubella shot. Then there's an inactivated vaccine, like the flu shot that we all get, which is a killed piece of the flu molecule that again allows our body to create a response. Then we have the tetanus vaccine, which is a toxoid vaccine, where we're teaching our body to then have response to tetanus. So if we see it, we will be protected from it. And then other vaccines that show you a protein that's similar to what's in a bacteria or virus that your body, again, develops an immune response to. I think your question was, how is this vaccine different? As you stated earlier, Leslie, that this vaccine technology has been in the works for a long time. So warp speed is the worst thing that we could have labeled it. So mRNA vaccines have been thought of and been in some sort of development process since the early 90s and have had some challenges in terms of how to develop them, just because they literally are taking some DNA from a virus, bacteria, et cetera, and basically that DNA allowing your body's machinery to manufacture the protein in the virus or what have you, that then your body can respond to it. In the past, we've had challenges in terms of making it more stable, et cetera. And over the past maybe 5 or so years, we've really, again, not warp speed, have used this technology to develop vaccines in the animal profession. So veterinary docs are using mRNA vaccines and also in cancer therapies, et cetera. So we were able to, when SARS-CoV-2 became a thing, to be able to adapt that technology to using this vaccine. And so just to be clear, the technology is slightly different from vaccines that we've had before, but has been in development for a long time. And as I think it was Dr. Farley who said, and the vaccines so far that we have based on this technology have been highly effective. But again, not new technology, but just new, a little bit different from what we've had in terms of other vaccines.
Great. Dr. Wilson, can you explain what mRNA is and how it works? And tell us about the what you know about the effectiveness of the vaccines that have been approved. And I think there's some more in the works.
So Dr. Agnew,
This is your bailiwick, so go. I mean, you just.
This is what. So part of what Dr. Agnew just explained is the process is what's going on in your immune system and how you get there. So first, we'll talk about it in a more molecular scientific term, and I'll give you a layman's example of what this is. So there's your DNA produces an RNA. And then that RNA tells your body what proteins to produce. So basically that's why we say mRNA. That message says, these are the proteins that you should produce. I get that message and I say, this is what I can do. So you're kind of going in this cycle of what we like to call the Central Dogma. But let's not get too technical with this. So think about it this way. If DNA would be wheat in a field, right? So depending on where that field is, what species of wheat, et cetera. And so you're going to bake a cake. But in order to bake that cake, you got to take that wheat and have it ground into flour that you can actually use. So the wheat is a DNA, the flour is a messenger RNA. And then based on that flour that you put together, mix it with various ingredients, you can get cake. You know, you can make if you're Southern like me, you can make your pie crust for sweet potato pie, et cetera. So based on that source of that wheat, what you mix that wheat with, it gives you the message or the food product or that thing you're going to have. So that's how mRNA processes. In this particular case, what scientists have done, and as mentioned before, one of the lead scientists from the NIH, Dr. Kazmika, is worked on this, and Smith. So what they were able to do is take that message, take that wheat from from the virus, and tell it to make a particular portion of it, right? So it's going to make that protein, that spike protein. And so, and thinking about how that works, let's have another analogy, right? I'm Southern, so I always like to give clear analogies. So imagine if you had a room in your house, and in that room, you had 100 or so balloons, and you took Velcro, one side of Velcro, and stuck it on that on that balloon. And then throughout the house, I don't recommend that the kids do this, but throughout the house, you put the other side of Velcro, and you turn on the fan, and the balloons start to blow around. So when a balloon makes contact with the other side of Velcro, it sticks. And then there you have it. So imagine your lungs being the other side of Velcro, the balloon is a virus. When they come in contact with each other, if they have the right pieces of the Velcro, they stick together. So in this case, what the scientists have done with the two main vaccines that have been approved for emergency authorization is they've taken the RNA, put it together and packaged it into an injectable form. Your body takes that messenger RNA, produces a protein or the spike protein, the surface protein of the virus, and then your body sees that, and literally you have cells in your immune system called macrophages or big eaters, and other type of cells called phagocytes. They go around, find those proteins and literally eat them, digest them, and then say to the rest of your immune system, hey, I have this thing here, I don't know what it is, come check it out. And so from that, you get a ramped up immune process that will activate your other white blood cells, and part of that is producing antibodies. So one of the key things we've talked about here today, and we're talking about, and we hear about with the COVID vaccine, COVID-19 is your body producing sufficient antibodies to protect you? So now let's go back to the room analogy. You turn the fan on, the balloons are bouncing around looking for the other side of Velcro that you have stuck in various places. Now imagine if you took another piece of Velcro and covered those other pieces of Velcro. So what exactly with the balloons attached to? So if you have a vaccination, and what happens is with this process is that the mRNA vaccine is in your body produces a protein, your body responds to those proteins, and antibodies are basically like a blocking technique. The antibodies will bind to those to the protein, and then your body produce antibodies. And then what happens if you actually experience COVID-19, those antibodies will coat the virus. And sorry about the noise, but will coat the balloons in the room. And so now the balloons can't stick because their Velcro can't attach. And that's effectively what's happening, is that scientists have been able over a number of years understand which RNA to package into this vaccine, inject the vaccine into a person. The person produce their own cells will produce that protein, and now will make antibodies that later on, if they experience or come in contact with COVID, now their body has the ability to block COVID-19. Now, the important thing here is by doing so, what an immune response or a vaccination does is if you think about if you're learning to drive, right? Or if you're learning to do something, the first few times you do it, you're a little hesitant, but eventually you get, okay, I understand how to do this thing. I understand how to use this program. I understand how to drive. So next time when you experience something, maybe something pops up that startled you a bit. If you're driving, you're a more experienced driver, you have the ability to respond. So that's what your body does. When you actually see COVID-19, the response after the vaccination is going to be a lot faster. And it's going to prevent the virus from, and the key thing is preventing the virus from binding to your cells and producing more virus, and then driving a real dramatic immune response. So your body is, in this case, what you're basically doing is taking a portion of the virus or the virus genome, or that portion of the virus that tells it what to make, give it to yourself. So not give it to yourself, but you're going to get a vaccination. And through that vaccination, what's going to happen is your body's going to be educated. And that's a key thing. All the vaccines doing in this process is educating your immune system on what exactly it looks like. So when it sees it, it can respond fast and deal with it and keep you healthy. And in some cases, may potentially prevent you from spreading to other people.
Great. I'm going to go to Dr. Farley with a different question, but before I move, just because it's come up in the chat box, and we're going to save most of the questions for the end, but as I see relevant questions come up during this time, we did receive a question from Rebecca Bixby that says, she thinks it's important to distinguish that the mRNA vaccine does not interact with host DNA. So this may be a little too technical. If you can just simplify that for the public. People get very nervous so her question is, I think it's important to distinguish that the mRNA vaccine does not interact with host DNA. People get very nervous when DNA is mentioned. Please clarify. So that's her question. And I'm not sure if that makes any sense to you. I'm sure it does, but if you could just talk about that, the mRNA.
Who's that for?
Pardon me? That's for
Dr.
you.
Agnew. Oh, for me? Okay. So, and I would like Dr. Agnew can chime in too. So yeah, so the mRNA from the vaccine does not interact with your DNA. So if you think about it this way, your DNA is in another, if your body is if the DNA is if a cell in your body is a house, your DNA is in another room, right? So if your DNA is in the bedroom, the RNA is going in the living room to get understood, have a conversation with your other parts of the machinery in your cell, and then it's producing a protein. Gotcha. So if the doors close in the bedroom, the RNA is not going, like, gotcha, not wandering into the bedroom to have a conversation. It's going to stay where it's supposed to, stay up front, have a conversation where it's supposed to have it, and it's going to get processed into protein, and that protein is going to go out the door and teach the rest of the neighborhood or your immune system what's going on.
Sure. Dr. Farley, so I think I at least understood that the vaccine then does not stop us from contracting COVID-19, but it does stop us from getting symptoms and getting sick. Is that correct? And once people receive the vaccine, this is a common question that we've seen a lot. Once people that receive the first and second doses of the vaccine, explain why they still need to socially distance and wear masks.
That's a great question. So this is a wonderful vaccine, and that's measured by the fact that it's 95% effective preventing you from getting sick. 95% effective, and 5% reduction in people getting sick amongst those who had the vaccine compared to those who didn't have the vaccine. Now, 95% though is not 100%. Okay, so even if you get the vaccine, there is some chance that you will get sick with this infection. It's not perfect. There's a second issue, and that's a little more complicated. It is possible that you may have this vaccine, you see the infection, and you don't develop any symptoms, but you may actually have the virus in you, and you may be able to spread it to somebody else. For both those reasons, the fact that the vaccine is not perfect and that there's at least a theoretical possibility you could spread it to others, we're still saying that even if you're vaccinated, you still need to wear a mask and keep your distance. So that's why I've said, although the vaccine is great, it's not going to prevent us from having to deal separately with this current winter wave of the epidemic. The winter wave right now is bad. We want to deal with it, but and as much as we're vaccinating now, the vaccine is not going to really help us right now. We still need to do all this community-wide masking and distancing. So that's the main reason for that.
So I'll stay with you since we're still in the, and we'll get to some of the, I recognize that there are good questions coming through the chat. We'll get through them, but I do want to deal with the medical aspects first, and then some of the more structural, how this vaccine is going to be distributed, what the criteria is, the community asset mapping and the things of those natures. But I want to deal with the scientific and medical aspect pieces of it first. So Dr. Farley, there are, no vaccine is perfect. Could you tell us what some of the side effects are? And then is there a group of people, people with autoimmune diseases, people with sickle cell? Someone asked a question about Guillain-Barré syndrome. What are the side effects? How often, what's the incidence of side effects? I know I'm asking you a lot of questions. Side effects, incidence of side effects, and what population of people, is there a recommendation for any population of people to not vaccinate?
Right. So first we have to make a distinction between side effects and really serious adverse effects.
Okay.
So side effects with this vaccine are very common. Most people will have a sore arm, okay? Not a big deal. Maybe about 15% of people, especially after the second dose, will feel pretty lousy the next day. They may have a fever, muscle aches. They may want to stay in bed all day long. That's a side effect. That's not a serious effect. That's a sign of your immune system working. When your immune system really kicks into high gear, it produces things that make your body feel lousy. And so I've actually talked to people that have experienced this. They say, sure enough, I felt lousy the next day. Not everybody does, it's about 15%. So that's really common. But the bigger issue is, are there serious adverse events? And I would say in the trials where they vaccinated tens of thousands of people, they didn't have any serious adverse events, where nothing that really was a life-threatening event, nothing that caused a permanent problem for the people who got the vaccine. Now, since the vaccine has been out, there have been a number of people who had a serious allergic reaction to them. And when I say number, we're talking about 15, 20 people. That's out of millions of people who've been vaccinated at this point. So it's still pretty rare. Those people in general are people who had an experience of already having a very serious allergic reaction to something else, maybe a different injection, maybe some other medical exposure. So it's not people who say have a food allergy or a hay fever sort of allergies. Those are very common. These are people who have to carry around what, in case you've heard this, an EpiPen, because in the past they've had a life-threatening allergic reaction. Those people probably should not get the vaccine, but that's a very small group of people. The vast majority of people, all of us who have allergies, can still get the vaccine. So as vaccines go, this is really a very, very safe vaccine. And you do have to compare that to the risk of not taking the vaccine, which these days is a pretty serious risk. And let me just say before I go off, I'm going to have to leave in just a few minutes here, and so I won't be able to answer subsequent rounds. Amber Termal has been dealing with the vaccine rollout and knows a lot more about that than me. So I apologize, I can't be able to stay longer. Again, I'm very serious that this is a very important group of people here. We want to continue this engagement. We really are going to need your help to make this all work. So let's have more conversations later on.
Sure. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for signing on. Soror Shaw, we need you to give us your information, your expertise about clinical trials. Explain to us what the typical process is, phases 1 through 4, and then particularly as African-American, as members of the African-American community, why is it important that we are represented in these trials, and what do we know about African-American participation in the clinical trials for this vaccine?
Okay, I'll try to give a quick overview of the various phases of the clinical trials. First off, when a drug is developed, the first thing that is important is to prove that it's safe before it's even provided to a potential subject or patient. There are preclinical studies that are conducted, whether it be through laboratory processes or in different types of animals that simulate a human genetic system, and doctors can speak more to that. So that process is the beginning of the process. So the first in human would be considered phase 1 studies. And these, again, are generally in healthy volunteers, patients who have to meet a series of inclusion-exclusion criteria, kind of like a perfect, almost a very healthy person that agrees to participate in these trials. One, to ensure that the product or the drug is safe. And that usually includes a very small group of people, and it's generally an open label study, meaning that both the doctors and the patients know what they're getting, and they are being closely monitored. Their blood is being tested. There's processes for testing blood that is done, and these patients are usually in a controlled environment where they're being constantly monitored to make sure the drug is safe before it even gets to the other phases. Through each phase, there are required checks that the pharmaceutical companies must do, material documentation that they have to prepare and submit to the FDA for US studies specifically, to show that they're following FDA regulations, that they're going through the required processes, and that as they proceed to the next phase, all their boxes have been checked, that they've met all the requirements as far as the type of adverse events that may be reported, side effects, serious adverse events. All these details must be provided to the FDA before they move into the next phase. The FDA then gives approval for them to move into the next phase. Next phase would be a phase 2 study, where it's a larger number of patients. These are patients that actually have disease or a sickness, or if it's a vaccine, that would be eligible for the vaccine. This is, again, a larger number of patients. Again, primarily testing safety. It may be somewhat of like a dose finding, like the ideal dose to administer to patients during these phase 2 trials. More study sites, it could be US only, it could be global, depending on what the objective of the product is that the pharmaceutical company wants to market. Again, after they get through phase 2, there's an end of phase 2 check. Similar, they have to prepare documentation to support their request to move into phase 3. During phase 2, there's also some safety and efficacy testing being done. Phase 3, and I think this is where that warp speed definition comes into play. It's a very large number of patients that usually participate in the phase 3 trials. The timing usually takes a lot longer than what was used for these vaccine studies. They usually take long because you have to recruit study sites to participate in these trials, as well as a large number of patients. Thinking, these vaccine trials their phase 3 study was like 40,000 patients that participated in these trials. To get 40,000 patients, think about how much time it would generally take. But because they put a lot of resources and a lot of funding into the process, it helped speed up recruitment of study sites and recruitment of study patients. It did not compromise the requirements of the studies. All of the sites had to follow the protocol. If patients had to be in the study for 21 days, they had to be in the study for 21 days. There was no shortcuts or other methods put in place to reduce the amount of time to test for the study. So they have to follow the same process. It's just that they were able to enroll patients a lot quicker and they put in more resources and more funding to be able to do that. And I believe that's where the warp speed term was more applied to get to the point of having enough data to make what they call a submission, drug submission to the FDA for approval. And these studies, some of them I believe are still ongoing, but they had enough data to prove so far that the drug has been proven to be safe and effective. So that's kind of like a summary of what the various phases are and what it takes to get from a drug to approval. So as far as African Americans being involved with the clinical trials, the challenge is, and I looked at some of the data from these vaccine studies, out of 44,000 patients, there are only about 10% Blacks that participated in these clinical trials. And why so few? One is because there are not a lot of trials available to the patients in the area. Our African American community needs more doctors to participate in the trials to recruit the patients. We tend to trust our doctors. So if we have doctors that are participating in the trials, that allows us an opportunity to participate, to have more African Americans in the studies. The other thing is there are a lot of inclusion exclusion criteria that may disqualify us from participating. Things like hypertension, autoimmune diseases. For clinical trials, they're looking for a good patient, one that they don't expect to have a lot of side effects or expect a lot of adverse events. So they're looking for patients that are generally healthy. So I think we have a disadvantage in that area a lot of times because we may not be the ideal patient for the clinical trials. And then the third and most common reason is because of lack of trust. I know we still have a taboo from the Tuskegee Institute syphilis experiment. So that lack of trust is still there. So again, going back to Senator Hughes' message about trusted messengers, if we have doctors in our communities conducting the clinical trials and able to educate the patients to participate and let them know that they're not putting themselves at high risk by participating in clinical trials, then I think we will increase the potential of having more of us participate in trials.
So, we're Deltas and we love the elephant, but let's do the elephant in the room, which you already slightly mentioned, which is the Tuskegee Trials, which Tuskegee University would love for us to not refer to it that way. They want it to be referred to its right name, which is the United States Public Health Service Trial, which is what conducted at Tuskegee University. But as an HBCU, they definitely don't want, and that's what sticks. That's what sticks in the minds of African Americans. We all, most of us know the story about this 50-year, I think maybe 70-year study, and it was a lack of treatment. And I think it's important to distinguish between, the participants in that study who did not receive treatment as opposed to, and were allowed to simply get sick and not be treated, although they were told they were being treated. Let's discuss that. Let's talk about the difference. And I'd like all three of our doctors remaining on the panel to discuss this Tuskegee thing and the difference between what happened with Tuskegee. But Tuskegee is not our only basis for mistrust with the medical community. But let's talk about that because it's what you hear. Black people hear, Black Americans. I had family members who like, nah, I'm not taking the vaccine, Tuskegee. And, I'll let everyone know that I did, thankfully for Dr. Alice Stanford, I was at the Deliverance and got my first dose of the vaccine on Saturday, a little bit hesitant, but I woke up, I got it Saturday, Sunday morning, I wasn't doing the Thriller dance. I didn't turn into a zombie. I didn't, nothing happened, and I'm still here. I'll keep my people posted, and I'm not Will Smith and I Am Legend, but these are legitimate concerns, given the disparities in treatment and outcomes. But I think we need to talk about the distinction between different treatment and lack of treatment, and then this vaccine. So I'd like each of our three doctors, actually Jacqueline Sorer-Shaw, I'd like you to start there, and then Dr. Agwu and Dr. Wilson, and then we can get into some of these conversations. Amber and Senator, just hold on for me. Thank you for your patience about rollout and access, because we want to talk about equity.
Yeah, I'll keep it short in that area. There is a history from that experiment where Black males were denied treatment, although they thought they were being treated for syphilis. There are a lot of things that have changed as a result of that experiment. There have been a lot of amendments to the FDA regulations as a result of that experiment. And one of the most important changes was informed consent. Every patient is required to sign an informed consent. The informed consent has specific sections that are required to include specifics about what you're signing up for, the risk associated with the clinical trial that you're signing up for, the side effects that are expected as a result of other work that has been done with the test drug, as well as people to contact if you require more information. It includes information about who's sponsoring, who's funding the clinical trial, so that you know exactly who's responsible for conducting this trial. The most important information in informed consent is what we call an institutional review board. They are responsible for reviewing these consent forms to verify that the information is consistent with the work that the pharmaceutical company said will be done. There's a protocol, and basically the work is the protocol, how the study is to be conducted. So the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, will review the consent form to make sure there's about 21 different elements that are required to be included in the consent form. So the IRB, which is an independent review committee, they have no relation to this pharmaceutical company. They have no relation to the clinical sites that are conducting the study. Their primary objective is to protect the rights and welfare of the study patients.
Great.
So the consent form is a new form and a new process that was not in place when that syphilis experiment took place, that is now a requirement. And if anyone is interested in participating in clinical trials, that's the first document that they should read. And also make sure they, even if they feel less than confident with what the information is providing, share it with their doctors, or if there's a phone number for the IRB. If they want to verify that the study is, a legitimate study, they should be able to contact the IRB if they have any concerns.
Okay. Doctors Wilson and Agwu, Dr. Wilson and then Dr. Agwu.
So this, as most cases, if there's something that's going on, our community will naturally and rightfully mention that I actually call it the Tuskegee Study. I don't actually say experiment because it wasn't experimentation. Part of what they were effectively doing is using Black bodies to incubate syphilis. And beyond that, they were, cruelly observing people and their progression of disease. When there was a treatment that was available, they could have taken penicillin. So let's take a little bit longer view of this. And for me, this is actually real quick before I go on. I want to say I need to make a correction. Is Dr. Kamika Corbett is a Black woman scientist at the NIH who worked to develop one of the vaccines. I misspoke her last name, but I think here is where understanding history, using those trusted messengers, and as well as working to find healthcare professionals that you trust is important, because there's a long history of medical abuse of Black folks. So this isn't just the 20th century with Tuskegee. It goes back to when the first Africans arrived on these shores. And there's a lot of abuse there. However, what I would say about that is that before we take off and mix a lot of things up, and I think that's part of what the conversations have been working to do, is that what we want to do is think about what we're talking about. Right. And so let's put it in more human terms. The key question is, can we safely take this vaccine, and make sure that it doesn't cause harm to I'm from the South, so I'll say our mom and them, our dad and them, our
That's
grandmothers, sorors, the bros, like whoever, like, we want to make sure that they're going to be okay. So we have to, ask questions and understand this. And so what we're effectively dealing with is what the senator mentioned, is a lot of, all the misinformation and the sheer horror we've lived through over the last year. Is the question is this vaccine capable of safely helping us move beyond this? Is it safely helping to put us in a position so when Thanksgiving rolls around, when the next holiday season rolls around, birthdays, etc., or just family get-togethers, or even if it's a frat party or a sorority party, can we have those and safely get together and intermingle? And from all the data from the trials, and even for the millions of people who've been currently vaccinated across the world with those different vaccines, we're seeing that they're safe. And so what we have to think about is, the question is really, are these vaccines safe, and are they going to help us survive this pandemic? Because the reality is, and let's just talk about this, like, if you're like me, I know a number of people who have passed away from COVID-19 complications after SARS-CoV-2 infection. I probably know a couple hundred people who have been infected and have had horrible, time dealing with it, and they've survived. The question is, are we in a position to utilize this vaccine to be safe? And all indicators and from all the data we have, and it's up to people to make their own decision, is yes, the vaccine is safe. This isn't an experiment. One of the things that, if we talk about technically, for a lot of for products that are made on the clinical level now, there aren't unknown things added, right? You need to know everything. Even a water source that may have been used to help generate this vaccine has to have, books upon books of paperwork to understand where it came from. And so from a medical standpoint, things have improved, but still ask those questions. Find people who've been vaccinated, like Leslie mentioned, so the entire chapter can, literally turn around and say, hey, how you doing today? You good? Okay, all right. So we know you good. So we're gonna keep checking on you because you're the soror anyway, but we're gonna keep checking on you to make sure you're good. So now you have people close to you who've already had this vaccine. They're fine. Right. If they have any complications or soreness or anything, they can tell you that, and you can trust what they're saying. Right. But that's the key thing. Let's have these conversations, and let's not, in this case, have to deal with a horrible pandemic, a horrible disease process, and unfortunately for some of those almost 400,000 people so far in the U.S. to pass away because there's help available and we're not fully utilizing that help. Right. We're not taking the vaccines in combination with social distancing, wearing masks, and doing all the things we need to do to be safe. So
great. Thank you, Dr. Agwu. And then we're going to turn, I have the chat is lit up. My phone is hot like fire, and there are just you all are asking some fantastic questions. The panel goes we're scheduled from 2 o'clock till 3:30. I did not say at the beginning, to the extent that our panelists are willing and available to stay longer, we invite them to do so. However, we do want to respect their time. We invited them from 2 o'clock until 3:30. We thank them for volunteering their time on this MLK Day of Service, and it's taking time away from their families, and they've contributed to this important conversation. I am doing my best to get through as many of the questions that we can, but I don't want to cut them off. I don't want to cut their answers. I don't want to cut the senator off. I don't want to cut Amber off. I'd rather have us get through fewer questions with thorough answers. And if they can stay, they can stay. If they have to depart at 3:30, they have to depart at 3:30, but we're going to hang out for an additional 15 to 20 minutes, and whoever can stay on can stay on. So I'm doing my best, you all. I'm not ignoring questions. We have some list of questions that we decided to ask early on. I haven't even gotten through 25% of them, but I'm trying to incorporate as many questions that I can so that you all, our panelists, our participants, can walk away with a little better understanding, a little more confidence, or a little more information to make your definitive determination on whether or not you're going to take this vaccine, when it becomes available to you or not. So Alice, Dr. Agwu, can you give us your thoughts on, the study and the safetyness, the effectiveness, the whether or not you feel comfortable? Quite frankly, I'd like to know if you feel comfortable. I'm probably sure you already have. Anyway, I'm rambling. Go.
So, I think, certainly there was a question you had for us about effectiveness in terms of vaccines. And I think, before I received the data and I was able to actually review the New England Journal article, which talked about the Pfizer article and then the Moderna vaccine, I too said when I was asked by my patients, well, I'm going to hold on, let me hear the data before I start to try to convince you to do something, because I think it's unfair and actually unethical to ask me to say that I endorse something without actually looking at the data. And so when the data came out, we actually fine-tuned the data and went through what we liked, what we didn't like, where there were questions, and literally all the appendices, et cetera. And I say we, our whole division in terms of infectious diseases. And the things that I was happy but not excited about, there was only about 10% Black people, because I'm like, I wish there were more Black people so I could say there were more in the studies. But 10% is about 3,000 in one study and about 3,000 in the other. So that's a fair number. And then highly effective. Now, what does that mean? When they looked at the number of people who got coronavirus in the placebo arm, so got a fake virus versus those in the vaccine arm, it was single digits in the corona vaccine arm, and then over 150 in the placebo arm. And so that's where you get that 95% effective in terms of reducing your risk of disease. So highly effective. And then the side effects, I think we need to talk about the side effects, and we need to be very honest and blunt about the side effects. I think it's probably more common. Not probably, it is more common after the second dose, but as many as probably 50% of people I'm hearing, and the vaccine, the studies actually said about 50%, there's some fatigue, there's some fever, about 50% of people had nothing, but everybody's posting their first vaccine doses, but not their second. And I think it's really imperative to post everything. Because if there's a hint that we're not being fully transparent, we will lose the credibility we have by saying, hey, I did it, et cetera. So yes, based on the data, based on what I'm seeing, based on science, I do feel comfortable and did get my first dose, due for my next dose in about a week and a half. I have a 72-year-old mom with Alzheimer's and a lung issue. She is getting the vaccine. I have a partner with diabetes who is going to get the vaccine. And really I'm advising as many people as I can to do it. And I'm lucky to be in the space to be able to provide that data. And I'm glad to be part of the conversation today. So yes, and that's, that's where we are.
Awesome. Amber, thank you for your patience. So let's talk about access, availability. What's the criteria? What's the city's plan to make this vaccine available? We do know that 4 times as many white people as Black people have taken the vaccine in Philadelphia. So what specifically, and I asked Dr. Farley this, but I'm very interested in this structural answer. Does the city have a plan to deal with getting this vaccine to the Black community? And initially when the pandemic hit, access to COVID testing was quite challenging. And quite frankly, there's a sentiment that without Dr. Stanford and other local community organizations, Black Philadelphians were not able to access COVID testing for a variety of reasons. And so despite the hesitancy and the reluctance that some of us may or may not have, for those of us who are ready, willing, and able, we don't want access to be an issue. So what is the city? I love Senator Hughes's message, trusted messengers, trusted message. Fantastic, but that's not a structural and a systemic answer. That's not a plan. What's the plan to get this vaccine and get access and equitable access?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Leslie, for that question. And also I'm excited to hear that you got your first dose on Saturday. So, please understand that in phase 1A, our plan was to get most of these doses out to the hospitals and healthcare systems. And so that was a big push that we made right at the very beginning. They were able to handle the Pfizer product, which was the first product that was approved under the emergency use authorization. That product requires very specific and very difficult storage and handling. So that was where we really pushed a lot of those first doses that we were allocated from CDC. The hospitals then went through their strategy of vaccinating their patient-facing healthcare providers, and they were all offering it, to everyone within the healthcare system that has patient-facing duties. So that doesn't just include nurses and doctors, but it also includes, staff that would be working in their cafeteria or working also in their janitorial services. So really just making sure that anyone who had patient-facing duties had access to those. And they reported back to us that they were surprised to see amongst all of their employees the hesitancy that they experienced in their African-American and Black colleagues. So I will say that the hospital systems, separately from what Philadelphia is doing as a city, is also working on this within their own hospitals and healthcare systems. What the city of Philadelphia is doing is also pushing doses out to all of the federally qualified health centers. So all of the FQHCs at this point have had an opportunity to vaccinate their staff. We felt that this was important, not only because they are a trusted healthcare partner, but they take care of many minority populations and immigrant populations within the city of Philadelphia. So we wanted to make sure that they had access, and they've all stayed open throughout this entire, coronavirus pandemic. We also have an RFP out right now that specifically funds community organizations who want to get involved, who want to get involved in coronavirus vaccine distribution. And so we are currently looking through proposals. It's on a rolling basis. We've yet to receive very many, but we know that some are coming. We're partnering obviously with Black Doctors COVID Consortium.
Let me just interrupt you right there. I'm sorry. You
Sure.
said because that's important. My ears I was listening, but I'm like, wait, hold it. So there's a request for a proposal for community organizations who want to be involved in distributing the vaccine.
That is correct.
So can you put in the chat at the, while you're not speaking, can you put a link to that so that we can begin to share that with other organizations, with the Black clergy, so that whatever community organizations are capable and willing to have feet on the ground in our community. I think it's important. This is my first time hearing about it. I'm sure no one else has heard about it, but in order to get things out to the community, I believe we need community resources. So I would love to have that link so that we can distribute that to as many people as far and wide as we can. And I'm sorry for interrupting you. Go.
No problem. I agree. I think it's incredibly important. And I will say it's a little bit buried and difficult to find on our website. So I'm happy to put that in the chat. The other thing that we are working on right now is making sure that we're doing robust community outreach. So I will say that our team is relatively small between my immunization program team and our preparedness team that have been supporting most of this work. We're only about 50 people. So we're really working hard to do a lot. So we haven't been able to do as much community outreach thus far as we would have liked to, but we are working with the preparedness program. They do weekly health bulletins, and they have a bunch of community-based organizations that they regularly work with. So we've sent out an invitation for a community-based presentation that is happening on Wednesday evening. That is going out to the Community Response Network. That is really the list is managed through the preparedness program, but that includes CDCs, PCA, so Philadelphia Corporation for Aging, the libraries. It includes quite a large number of people. I think there's also block captains on there. So that will be happening on Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. And then we're going to be doing these presentations regularly, as well as people send questions in. And I put in the chat the covidvax@phila.gov. Send questions in there because we will be sending out weekly health bulletins to make sure that people's questions are getting answered. And I also put in an FAQ section that's on our website right now. And we will be updating that FAQ section as people submit additional questions. One of the things I wanted to touch on that I know wasn't a question for me, but you asked about Operation Warp Speed previously. And I think one of the things that is critical for people to understand is not just the pieces of this that had to do with creating the vaccine, but also the manufacturing of the vaccine. And so normally what happens is after a product gets through phase 3 clinical trials, only then can they start raising the money to manufacture vaccine. But one of the things that Operation Warp Speed did was they front loaded that manufacturing pipeline. So those vaccines that are undergoing phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials are already under manufacturing, so that when or if FDA approved them under the emergency use authorization, they could start pushing those doses out immediately and not have to wait until that point to start actually manufacturing doses. And that was critically important because we were able to start receiving doses in Philadelphia on the 14th, even though the EUA, the FDA's EUA had just been approved like the day before. We wouldn't have been able to do that if those vaccines hadn't already been manufactured.
Okay, great. Senator Hughes, so we know that community influencers are important in helping to provide the information. What steps is your office taking to ensure that accurate information is being influenced, is being communicated? And then how are you connecting, like how do you identify community influencers? How do you identify the trusted messengers?
So thank you. And I changed my background once I figured out how to do it to this because it's very important. And I'm gonna get to that in a second. It's very important. And that's not a campaign background. That's just a straight up Biden Harris. We took care of that business. All right. It's really, really important. How have I? First of all, the members of your sorority have been fundamentally involved in everything that we've done. Every platform, telephone town halls, Zoom meetings, text message programs, my radio show, mailers, everything like that has got a Dr. South, Dr. Posse, Dr. Stanford, Dr. The twins, McDonald and Wardlaw, Dr. Dallenberg, George Dallenberg from CHOP. All of y'all have been fundamentally involved in communicating to my constituents and broader communities the issue about COVID and answering any and all questions. Those are the trusted messengers. They come from your organization. But I also want to be clear about this. Trusted messenger, the trusted message is definitely not an action plan. It is a philosophy. It is a philosophy. And if your philosophy starts there, then everything from that should be manifested from that philosophy. Now, we talk about a lot of stuff right now. Family, we're talking about a lot of stuff right now. Understand, and my good friend from the City Department of Health, Amber, she's gonna know this. Amber can't wait until Wednesday, January 20th at 12:01 p.m. She can't wait. She can't wait for that. Why is that? That's when these folks behind me, that's when they take over. That's when y'all take over. And I know she's an AKA, but it's okay. All right? They take over.
For now.
All right? They take over. All right? And what I mean by that, a sea difference, a huge difference in how all of this piece plays out. You talk about messaging. If you go to the Biden-Harris website, buildbackbetter.gov, buildbackbetter.gov. Go to their website around the whole COVID piece. First of all, it's brothers and sisters who are on the committee who are developing the whole piece that Joe and Kamala put together, all right? Secondly, the whole implementation program is going to change dramatically, all right? They're going to be thrusting vaccines out in terms of access all across the board, all right? All across the board. They've got money put aside to make sure, sorors, to make sure that there are trusted messengers delivering the trusted message through trusted platforms. You picking up what I'm putting down here, okay? All right? Through trusted platforms so that our community is not disaffected, but in fact is embraced in this conversation, all right? So just understand, we're talking about a lot right now. And the clinical stuff, I have no way of understanding, how that's going down. I trust the doctors and all of that. I'm trusting y'all, because y'all are trusted messenger, okay? I'm trusting y'all, all right? But what I know is this. At 12:01 p.m., assuming we still have a government, all right? There's no more insurrections and stuff, all right? At 12:01 on Wednesday, all right? When the keys are handed over, all right? And we go back and get the Lincoln bus that Trump's people took out of the White House. I know y'all saw that, all right? When we go back and get all of that stuff brought back in, everything has changed. Look at his proposal that he announced on Friday, $1.9 trillion, okay? That will augment the money that's already flowing that hasn't hit ground yet, all right? And then it will change everything, and we've got to be prepared. Your soror always uses a phrase. Your soror Cheryl always uses a phrase. If you stay ready, you never have to get ready, okay? All right? And so we will then have to be prepared for implementation, because it's going to be go. Remember, we're trying to get 100 million people dosed up in 100 days.
Did you say dosed up?
Dosed up. Yes, I said that. I made that up. I know, Dr. Allison, that's not a technical term. I'm looking at you, looking with your eyes all looking up in the air. Okay. And Penny Nixon, I know you raised me better than that. I understand all of that. Okay. All right. But you know, we got to look, I'm getting it. Okay. As soon as I can, I'm getting it. All right. And I'm just going to go, I'm going on faith, because Penny and Caliph and Jacqueline Shaw and all the rest of y'all said it's cool. So if it's cool, I'm going on it. All right. You know,
one more question for you, Senator, because I don't want to, I know that everyone has time. And again, we're going to stay for a couple more minutes, but just in case you need to go, can you talk to us about how the state is monitoring the rollout of the vaccine, and to make sure that this thing is, we have, as Black Americans, we have equitable access concerns. So
Absolutely.
what, you know, how is the state ensuring, or how are you, you know, in your position ensuring that when this vaccine is available, you know, we understand that there are priorities and there are categories of people, but how do we make sure that Black Americans who are willing and able and ready to take this vaccine get our fair share of it?
Well, my name is not Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but I have a feeling that when that Wednesday hits, okay, them categories are going to start falling by the wayside. Okay. All right. I think that the conversation that I've been hearing coming out of the advisory committee is that they want to, you know, get rid of a lot of them categories and everybody go for it. Now, the state in the Department of Health has an equity committee. Okay. Just like the city does. I think Dr. Stanford and others are involved in an advisory committee trying to advise us. We have, and he just joined about 10 minutes ago, my good friend and colleague who chairs the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, Senator Art Haywood, who's on, who just joined us. He and I talk a lot about making sure that everything is in place and monitoring. This is a rolling piece, sis. This is a rolling piece. But we are paying close attention to making sure that the money flow, the money flows, the vaccines flow, and that we're in the middle, in the loop on as much as possible so that our community can get addressed first.
Right. Okay, so it is 3:30. This is our official end time, but we're going to stay for 15 to 20 more minutes. I invite all of the panelists. First of all, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for taking out time out of your day. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Thank you for doing the best you can with the information that you know. There are, of course, I think the questions that I want to ask that remain are, we talked about what we don't know. I mean, what we do know. You know, we talked about all of your comfort with the vaccine, what we know about getting access. Let's talk about the things that we don't know. There are some things that we don't know. I'd like to have some questions to have a short discussion about what we don't know, you know, how long this thing is effective. Will we have to get it every year? Will we have to get it every 5 years? Is it, you know, is it a one-time thing? Pregnant mothers, lactating mothers, things like that. So we're going to hold this conversation open for another 15 minutes. If any of you are available to remain, we invite you to stay for another 15 minutes. We won't hold you past 15, 20 more minutes, I promise. But just in case you have to leave, we thank you. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts, because there's so much information and misinformation being spread around. So before you all leave, if you have to, I want to thank you, Dr. Agwu. Thank you, Senator Hughes. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Thank you, Soror Shaw. Thank you, Amber. I think she got off. Dr. Farley already left. So we will say goodbye to those of you who have to leave. And if any of you are willing to stick around, I mean, I have about 50 more questions for each of you. So whoever can stay, I have questions for you. If you can stay, we have questions for you. All right, so I'm gonna just look through everybody. Just give me a second just to see who's still around. I know Dr. Farley had to leave. Amber let us know that she had to go. Sora Shaw is still here. Dr. Wilson is still here. Dr. Agwu is still here. And Vincent Hughes. Let's go, folks. All right, so somebody talk to me about, we're gonna go back to the science. Dr. Agwu and Dr. Wilson, I'd like you to I'll leave this open-ended for both of you to just chime in on this. What don't we know about? You know, what are the things that I'm trusting the available science? I'm trusting the research that I've done. I'm trusting, I went to trusted messengers. I went to Black folk, you know, talk to me, listen, you know, I am a conspiracy theorist at heart. So it's, listen. I'm a student of history, so I'm like, yeah, nah, I'm not fitting to do it. Nope. And that's where I was. But I am also, I know, I look around and see what's happening in our community, and this thing looks like it's going to be, and it's monstrous. So let me get past the conspiracy theory. Let me pick up some articles. Let me go read. Let me talk to Black folk. Let me go to Dr. Kizmikia's website and look at every little YouTube video she's talking about. I've done all of those things. So I'm comfortable because I listen to people I trust and who have said to me, as you two have unequivocally said, I believe it's safe. And that's all this information that we have. So based on the information that we have, and based on people like you, I said, okay, I have a 76-year-old mother who lives with me and has some medical issues that make her, you know, vulnerable. So I don't let anybody in my front door. If I don't have, I'll go out and do things, but people can't come in this house because the Rona can't jump on me and I kill my mama. Because then my sister's trying to kill me. It's a whole fight, and you know, we ain't got no assets. It's a problem. So we just can't have that kind of thing here. Not from the Rona, from anything else, but not from the Rona, folks. So what are the things that we don't know? Do we know how long this vaccine is effective? Do we know how long, you know, how many shots we have to take? Why are some of these vaccines 2 doses, and then it looks like Johnson & Johnson has a 1 dose? You know, talk to me about some of the things that we don't know.
So I'm happy to start, and Dr. Wilson, please jump in too. I mean, I think there were several of the questions that were asked in the chat that allude to things that we don't know. So I think it should be clear that there are 2 vaccines that are approved here, but there are many more that are either in the works, some with similar, similar technology. But what we do know for the vaccines that we have now, there are 2 doses, that you said, that the other ones may have less. And that's the whole idea, that you have not seen something, we're introducing your body to it, so then your body can prime that immune response and have a good immune response. So that's the reason for 2. And many of the vaccines that we already use have 1, 2, or 3 doses and have boosters with it. So I think that's what we know so far. In terms of how long it lasts, I think we don't know. I think we will know. We're starting to get an idea of natural infection, and we do know that the immunity you get, or the protection you get from natural infections, so acquiring COVID, is so variable. There are people who've had known coronavirus that 3 months later have no antibodies. There are those who have lots of antibodies. So we're estimating that response, or that protection you have, may be anywhere from 3 to 6 months, but we don't know. The vaccine, we're hoping it's going to be longer than that, and I think that's right. Will it be an annual dose? We don't know that yet. I think if we think that the virus is going to be preserved in some way and not be like the flu, where there's tons of variation, then maybe we may be able to get away with that. It's not clear. So I think the things that we don't know in terms of, you know, again, immunity, we don't know for kids yet. So there will be separate studies that are already going on for kids to look at vaccine responses for children. We don't know if the vaccine actually prevents you from actually having asymptomatic carriage of COVID that just doesn't make you sick. So we don't know that, right? So I think there's some pieces that we will see, and we'll be able to say a year from now when we're having this conversation, or 6 months, we'll have follow-up, and lots of the studies have built in sub-studies, et cetera, to be able to answer a lot of these questions. It's new. And so we'll be able to give more data hopefully soon. We just don't know some of those sort of long-term protection answers now.
What about nursing pregnant and nursing mothers?
Yeah, so the recommendation is that if you were pregnant at the time you were enrolled in the study, you weren't allowed to be in the study. But there, of course, are always people who get pregnant while they're in the study, et cetera. And so right now the recommendation is that while they weren't exclusively studied, that they should not be prevented from getting the vaccine, right? So that pregnant women should have access to the vaccine. There's no data to say that there's going to be ill effect, but it's always we're protective of pregnant women. And so we're making sure that we keep them in registries and we see what happens. But so far, there's been no safety signal in women who have become pregnant after getting the vaccine.
Sure. Dr. Wilson.
All right, so we reached the portion of the conversation where things get a bit more relaxed, and we can just talk freely. I appreciate that. So, yeah, great questions about what we don't know, and as Dr. Agwu just laid out, there are a host of things we don't know because, frankly, there hasn't been the time to study. Right? There are people who started the vaccines around this time last year, and when they were engaged in the trial, so we're learning a lot from those folks. And as more and more people get vaccinated, we're going to learn a lot from them as well. But what I would say is, rather from the side of what we don't know about the vaccine, I would say what we don't know about the disease itself. And so for me, that's a scary part, right? So the question is, how long are we going to live in these ultra careful processes? How's it going to impact our lives in general, health, our ability to see our families, like school, like all those things. And so from this perspective of using, and I consider most things in science as tools, right? The vaccine is a tool in the arsenal or one concept that we can use to protect ourselves. But we have to learn, like that's the key thing. We're going to learn a lot about the question you just asked about, should pregnant women take it? There are questions about people who may have certain immunodeficiencies, disease, like all these things are going to come up and we're going to learn a lot more about it. And I would just say for everyone, just kind of hold fast as that data becomes available. Make sure you're talking to again, to quote the senator, your trusted partners or trusted messengers to get that information to help you learn about it.
I forgot to put up the end of panel questions, poll questions really quickly. Sora Marvelisa, can we put the end of panel poll questions up, which are just to get an assessment of whether people feel like they learned helpful information, more information than they did, if they changed their mind. So can we get those I believe there are two. There we go. Everybody who's left, who didn't leave, thank you for hanging around. To question number one, did you learn any information from today that will help you make a more informed decision to receive or decline the vaccine? That's the first question. And number two, did you change your mind about the vaccine as a result of attending today's program? In the meantime, we have 5 minutes because I really don't want to hold our panelists much longer. Let's see what's going on with one of these. And quite frankly, everyone, I'm down to about 35 more questions from the chats. So I believe we will be able to make this recording available. We'll let you know about it. And 1 second, let me just look at some of these questions. There we go. Oh, okay. Someone said there's no mention of what herd immunity means. Can you tell us what that is as we as we strive toward a COVID-free future? I heard on another panel, a physician opine that COVID is here to stay, sort of like HIV. And Dr. Agwu, I would really like to hear your opinion about that. And I was startled. I was like, whoa, wait, what do you mean? And that was her opinion. And we didn't get to delve into that question any further. But what are your thoughts about that statement, which to me is frightening? It's sort of, I don't want to envision a future where we're masked up and socially distanced for the rest of our life. What does herd immunity mean? And what's your response to that thought? And it was just an opinion, her opinion was COVID's here to stay. It's here to stay. So,
yeah. So as an HIV practitioner, I have dealt with many years with the conspiracy theories about HIV, the what do we do is meant for Black people, all these things. And so the questions and the concerns that came about COVID were the same that I've heard for years, decades now about HIV. And so I think it is very possible that COVID is here to stay, right? And I think just like when you take back 25 years ago, when we talked about HIV, we were, not eating after each other, we were hiding from people, we were ostracizing people, we were stigmatizing people. A lot of that still happens today, but I think with more information and with testing and with hopefully now a vaccine for COVID, it may be here to stay, but in a different way, right? So this goes to the concept of herd immunity, right? So enough people get infected or enough people get vaccinated, that a critical component, at least 70% or more of the population has some immunity to the virus, then we're not going to be in the state where we're having to do the extreme measures to control it, that we hopefully are moving towards something like smallpox, et cetera, where we have now enough immunity in the population that we're not going to propagate that along. But we actually can't get there if critical components of people don't get the vaccine or don't try to, again, like mask up like things that we were doing now. If critical portions of the population don't do that, we won't get to herd immunity where we're protected, even for those that don't get the vaccine. I think it's a great question. I'd love to think of a time where we wouldn't have to talk about COVID. I think we will get to a point where we don't have to talk about COVID the way we are today, right? The things that we have to do that completely alter our lifestyles, et cetera. But I think for a period of time where it's going to be here. Just like the 1918 flu changed the way we lived, right? I think this may be some of that.
Gotcha. Dr. Wilson, same question.
Mr. Leslie.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to say something about this. My career started off, and I hate to say it because it kind of dates me, but that's all right. My career started off in the early days of HIV, okay? In the early days of HIV, when nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to deal with it. It was taboo. If you had it, boom. And if your soror, Cheryl, okay? That was a formative reality for her when she was on Broadway. At that same time, people were dying right in front of her. Right. What we've got to have this mindset, too many people died unnecessarily in HIV. We can't repeat that, right. Okay? We can't repeat that. We can't allow so many folks in our community to unnecessarily leave us. Like the 300 and some thousand people have unnecessarily left us since March of last year because of incompetence from the White House, all right? And how they've handled this whole thing. So I'm just saying, I'm just imploring that we have an empowerment attitude about this, okay? That we're going to beat this disease, all right? We're not going to be subject to it. We're going to beat it. We're going to kick its behind, all right? And we have the power to do it. Ask the right questions. The virus is going to morph as we're seeing, okay? Over time, it's going to change over time, all right? We got to do everything that we humanly possibly can do to get ahead of that, stay up with it, be educated for it, but have this mindset. We're going to win on this.
I like it.
Losers to this, we're going to win on this.
I like it.
We're going to do it the Delta way. How about that?
Right? Hey, I really like it now. Dr. Wilson, same question. And then also with the herd immunity and is COVID here to stay, what about the people for whom the recommendation is that they don't take the virus? Can we talk about the importance of getting to a certain level and what percentage of the population needs to be protected so that we are also, as African Americans, for me personally, I'm about the collective of us. So there are some of us who cannot take this vaccine. The recommendation is for them not to take the vaccine. So what is herd immunity, and why do we need to get there, and how is that important to those members of our community who cannot, for whatever reason, not who won't, but who cannot take this vaccine?
So let's look at that from the standpoint of, and I always like to take what Dr. Agwu and as well as the Senator has said, is that there's a fight that's happening. The question is, are we going to, for each individual, are you going to actively be engaged, passively be engaged, or just kind of throw your hands up and say, whatever happens, I'll be here or not? So the vaccines offer us an opportunity to fight. Wearing masks offers us an opportunity to fight. social distancing and following these precautions gives us an opportunity to fight. So get your fighting gear on. Let's get out there in the streets. Let's do what we need to do. So that's the first thing. So when we talk about herd immunity, so there's some numbers, I think, so let's say mainly some of the numbers Dr. Fauci was pushing out was 85-90% of vaccinations to get that herd immunity. So here's what we're talking about. So let's talk about a different disease real quick. So think about back here a few years ago, there was an outbreak of measles, like in New York City, out in California. How did that happen? What happened was there were a number of people who were not vaccinated that contracted measles, and it started to spread within the community, right? So if you think about a vaccine in a different way, the vaccine is basically your umbrella, right? If you have an umbrella, a large umbrella, you go outside, it rains, the water, it doesn't get onto you, right? And then you don't get wet and end up, touching somebody else or passing things on to them. So that's the goal, right? And the key part is for those of us who are able to get not just a COVID vaccination, but other vaccines, that's part of a responsibility that we can take on is how do I protect my child that has they're immunocompromised because they were born with a certain disease? How do I protect my elderly parent who may be immunocompromised so autoimmune diseases are out there in our communities for people who may have certain autoimmune diseases and they're dealing with that and don't want to deal with COVID on top of that. How do we get into that fight and best protect them? And part of that is vaccinations. If it's an infectious disease that we have a vaccine for. So if you can imagine, even if, let's say that statement was correct and COVID is going to be here, if we get to, if I remember correctly, the US population is roughly around 300 million. Mm-hmm. If you get 100 million people vaccinated, that's 1/3 of the population in 100 days. So then you spend the rest of the year or the next 100 days trying to get to 150,000, half a million, try to get to 200 million, as many people as possible. So now what happens is the virus has nowhere to go, right? It can be out there, try to spread, but it can't because people are vaccinated. The other important part about this is right now, almost 30 million people in the US have been infected with COVID-19, with SARS-CoV-2 and experienced COVID-19. The truth of biology is a virus passing through that many people becomes infinitely more dangerous because naturally it's going to mutate. Mm-hmm. And we don't know if it's mutating to become less dangerous, less transmissible, or if it's becoming more effective, right? So if you think about the strains from the UK, South Africa, the Brazilian strain, those strains are being rated as being more effective, right? And what that means is, it's kind of like, think about it from the standpoint of if it took in the air 100 COVID virions to infect a person, those strains are more infectious, so maybe it only takes 20, right? So the ability to infect people has increased. So what we want to do in this fight is, if you have access to the current vaccinations, learn about it. And if you're comfortable, as soon as I'm eligible and I can get out there, I'm going to take the vaccine. My household is going to be vaccinated. Get a vaccination. That's your way to fight. Currently, maintain social distancing, maintain wearing masks, keep your guard up. Over time, they're going to, as we mentioned, they're going to be more vaccines. Those vaccines, some of them are different, some of them are not RNA vaccines, but the more we have available, the more we can actually engage and get into the fight. And again, from the herd immunity standpoint, the more people in the herd that are vaccinated, the more people in the herd that have the ability to not spread it, means that we can protect those of us who don't have the ability to take the vaccine, or the vaccine may not be effective in them because they may have certain immunocompromised situations. And that's a responsibility we have. Learn as much as we need to learn about this vaccine. Not convince yourself, but learn that it's safe and take the vaccination. And again, turn to the soror and say, hey, you've taken it. How you doing? And let's get on this pathway to fighting, because in the fall, I would love to see people being able to kind of interact a bit more and not have this massive spike in virus infection. And that's how we're going to get there. As a team, working together, being vaccinated, doing all things we can to make sure we get there.
Great, thank you. So Marvelisa, can you put those final question poll results up? Great. Wow. Did you learn any information? So 97%. Thank you very much. Did you change your mind about taking the vaccine? 32% people said yes. 68% people said no. And at the beginning of the poll, we had 75% people who had said they had decided to take the vaccine. Thank you for that. Sora Marvelisa, can you move that? Remove the poll results. Thank you. And I am now going to welcome Sora Coleman to close us out. Again, thank you everyone for, it's been almost 2 hours, 2 informative hours. I hope it's been helpful and spread the word. We're live on Facebook. We'll be able to share this. And I believe we should be able to make the recording available in the future, but we'll let you know about that. So Marvetta?
Got to pay attention because you never know what's going to happen with Leslie, and she's going to call on you and you have to be ready. Having said that, it goes without saying that we are so appreciative of every one of our panelists. You have brought us information. You have done what we asked from the door. You have been insightful. You have been informative. You have even been inspiring because we know that there are those that came into the event not really knowing exactly what it was that they wanted to do. We don't know necessarily where those poll numbers meant that they changed their mind to take it or to not take it. But be that as it may, we know that the information that was received made a difference. We want to thank you for your participation. Certainly, this was the launch of what we're calling the COVID-19 community conversations. And so to our audiences, we thank you so much for your input. Based on the chat room and listening to Sora Leslie talk about how her text messages were blowing up, we know that this is a topic, a subject, an issue that we all are interested in learning more about, and that we are looking for that time when we are going to hopefully operate, as Dr. Wilson said, in an environment that is a little less restrictive, but nonetheless, we know that the fight is up to us. So the fight is the mask. The fight is the social distancing. The fight is the vaccine based on what you may decide is your own personal decision. Having said that, thank you so much for joining us. Leslie mentioned that we will be looking at how to make this recording available to you publicly. And so with that, we certainly say stay masked up, stay socially distanced, make good decisions based on what your personal needs are, but hopefully it will be from an informed standpoint. Continue to do the research. I heard Dr. Agwu and Sora Jacqueline Shaw talk about that there are so many resources out here. Find out the relevancy of the resource that you're looking at, not just your friend next door. No problem with having friends next door, but they may not be the best resource for information for your decision making. So let's get in there and make some determinations based on being informed. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again on the red sofa. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.